So please join me in welcoming the 42nd President of the United States, President Bill Clinton.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Jared, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the warm welcome. Figuratively and literally, I'm very grateful that you invited me to Las Vegas today. The federal government is shut down because of a snowstorm. And even though we just completed, we don't have the February numbers yet, but January was the fourth hottest January ever recorded on planet Earth since temperature records have been kept. It was the coldest winter in New York in more than 20 years, and it's still going on. So thank you for bringing me to Las Vegas. I also want to say how very grateful I am to Microsoft. Many of you may not know this, but Microsoft has been a very important partner for the Clinton Foundation. For the last 10 years or so, we have worked together through the Clinton Global Initiative to build literally a global network of givers working together, and to do so increasingly with university students here in America and from throughout the world. So I'm grateful to Microsoft for that, and they have been a part of our Clinton Global Initiative for 8 years now, as I said. So on the way, when I was preparing to come here, I asked my staff to give me a list of the commitments that Microsoft had been a part of. It's 36 pages long. You should be very proud of that. I was thinking that my daughter used to make fun of me for being so technologically challenged, and they still do, my family, but I always tell them maybe so, but I understood the implications of it, and we tried to get the big things right. When I became president, there were only 50 sites on the internet total. More than that have been added since I started talking. The average cell phone weighed 5 pounds 21 years ago. So I suppose just the changes that have occurred is proof positive that this age has been shaped as much by technological change as anything else. It was obvious to me that information technology was going to go through every aspect of the American economy, and so we did what we could to speed it up, including to connect all our schools, our libraries, our rural hospitals, to accelerate the extent to which these things were affordable through the E-rate, which has saved billions of dollars to schools every year, to do things which now seem like dark ages, self-evident, but which made a big difference at the time. We also reformed the telecommunications law for the first time in 60 years, and that law alone added more than 300,000 jobs to the economy. At the end of that 8-year period, though IT-related jobs only comprised 8% of our total employment, they had been more than 20% of our job growth and more than a third of our wage growth, which explains why in the last 5 years that I served, it's the only time since the late 70s, when the percentage increase in income of people in the lowest 20% of income brackets was actually slightly higher than the percentage increase in the top 20%, and all 5 quintiles of our economy rose together, something we need to try to recover again in the United States and to create for people throughout the world. But the main thing I want to say from your point of view is that it happened because there were lots of new jobs and because the job mix changed, and it was all driven by accelerating the rate of technological change throughout the economy. Today, we face those challenges again. I sat down not very long ago for an interview at Wired magazine with Bill Gates, and we talked a lot about what we're doing today in our current lives in the NGO world to try to maximize the use of technology to lift poor people. And I could give you a few examples. When the earthquake struck Haiti, only 10% of the people had access to basic banking services, but 80% plus had a cell phone. So the largest cell phone provider in Haiti, Digicel, an Irish company, partnered with a Canadian bank, Scotiabank, to let people do banking on their cell phone, and all of a sudden, virtually everyone in Haiti had access to basic banking. It was a very important advance. After the tsunami hit South Asia in late 2004, we tried to put all the families that wanted to return back into the sea with fishing boats in Indonesia and in Sri Lanka and in southeastern India and in Thailand. We also gave all those who did not have it a cell phone so they could check what the real price of fish was 30 miles up and down the coast from where they were. Their average incomes increased 30%. Just because they could find out what the price of fish was. When we succeeded in lowering the price of AIDS medicine, something you saw a little bit about on the film, and we were able to provide it to people at the lowest cost and high quality that could be available anywhere, it quickly became apparent that we wouldn't be able to maximize the benefits of medicine for AIDS, or thanks to the Gates Foundation, we did the same thing for malaria. Thanks for Pfizer, we did the same thing for tuberculosis for people who also had AIDS. All of that needed, first, the ability to do testing, to preserve the samples properly, to move things rapidly. And we were able to dramatically lower the price and the time of laboratory tests in order to save people's lives. It was all possible because of technology advances, and now I'll give you just an example. When President Bush passed the PEPFAR program, which was a great thing, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, I talked to him and I asked him to let me submit all the generic drugs in our arsenal to the American Food and Drug Administration. I said, if they get approved, I want you to say it's okay for countries to use American tax money to buy those drugs. He agreed. We did it. The time he left office, there were 1.7 million people in the world alive because of his initiative. Then when President Obama took office and Hillary became Secretary of State, she asked a doctor named Eric Goolsbee, who'd won one of the nation's first AIDS clinics in San Francisco in the 1980s, to be the director of PEPFAR. He wanted to go from about 48% of the people America was helping getting this medicine to as close to 100% as he could. And so he was able to use basically a lot of the changes that our foundation had helped to create and technology to do that. So when Hillary left the State Department, we were at more than 98% of all the people getting medicine from American tax dollars, getting it through this pipeline of high-quality generics. And in President Obama's first term, thanks to technological changes, the United States did, from treating 1.7 to 5.1 million people alive on AIDS medicine for actually slightly less money. That is the power of technology, to triple the number of people you're keeping alive in poor countries and give them a chance to have their future. So, this modern world has been pretty great for us, or none of us would be here today. But as you could see from the pictures, there's still quite a few challenges. And what I would like you to think about today is, as we look at the 21st century world, first of all, what do you think's wrong with it, and how do you want it to come out? How do you think about what you would like the world to look like when you have children who are your age? Is it even possible for you to think about it anymore, since you're living on the cutting edge of technology, and every day, even a great country like Microsoft, a great company like Microsoft, knows that its future depends upon staying out on that edge and not going out so far that if you make a mistake, the whole thing can collapse. For me, it's a pretty simple proposition. I have seen for 20 years now, since the end of the Cold War and the rise of this remarkable age of technology, the world grow more and more interdependent. But interdependence simply means we can't get away from each other, that we cannot divorce ourselves from the events taking place around the corner and around the world. Technology can pull us closer and closer together, but can do so in ways that are good or bad. Roadside bombs, smuggled centrifuges to develop nuclear capacity, just traveling bacteria, finding people that have never been afflicted with it before, so that bacterial infections, I predict, will become a larger and larger source of severe illness and death in the years ahead. So for me, it was a simple question. I wanted to build the positive and reduce the negative forces of our interdependence. I wanted the world to be based on shared responsibilities, shared opportunities and prosperity, and a shared sense of community. Not one in which we erase our interesting differences, but one in which we recognize that our common humanity matters more, and unless we act as if it matters more, we'll never be able to preserve many of those differences. So when I left the White House, I set up this foundation to try to do something that I think is very important in the modern world, to try to work with governments and with the private sector to identify opportunities and problems that we can address faster, better, at lower cost. And the Gates Foundation is one of my major partners, and I think it's the finest foundation in the world. It's something you can be very proud of that your founder has done. I remember when Hillary sponsored a philanthropy conference in the White House near the end of our service there. Bill Gates had recently announced that he and Melinda intended to set up this foundation and give away their money, and he said, "I'm pretty sure it's going to be harder to give this away than it was to make it." And I think he would certainly still say that's true today, but it's important. So I would like you to first to say this. There's something else technology has done in a world in which we need all citizens to be participants in the great debates and the great action necessary to build the positive forces of our interdependence and reduce the negative ones. Everybody's got a bigger voice than they used to have because of the power of numbers. When the tsunami hit South Asia, it was, believe it or not, the first major natural disaster which was dominated by internet giving. So you may remember that the first President Bush and I were asked by the second President Bush to organize a big effort in America to try to help those countries. And I wound up working over there for several years with the United Nations. But anyway, the American people gave $1 billion to the tsunami-affected countries. And there were lots of million-dollar contributions. But the median contribution, thanks to internet giving, was $56. I'll never forget, I knew the world was changing 10 years ago when I went with Hillary, who was then a senator from New York, to the state fair in Syracuse, and a lady came out from behind one of the game booths in a little uniform, you know, that all the people working there wore, and pushed $50 into my hand and said, "That's for the tsunami." She said, "I'm really sorry I couldn't send it over the net, but as you see, I'm working and I couldn't get off." That was a decade ago. Fast forward to 2010, the earthquake hits Haiti. Again, the American people gave $1 billion. This time, the median contribution had dropped to $25 because it was the first natural disaster characterized by text giving. And depending on what number you punched in, you could transfer $10 to the Red Cross or my foundation's work down there or any number of others. In Canada, I think the number was $5. But it revolutionized the world of disaster response and empowered people to have influence as global citizens that they might never have otherwise had. Many of you have helped finance small businesses halfway around the world through Kiva.org, a great organization, and I could give you 50 other examples. But the point is that just as you are here to think about what you can do with technology in your current roles at Microsoft, we live in an interdependent world in which there is always going to be a gap between what the government can provide and the private sector can produce, and in which, for different reasons, government and private sector are likely to be more risk-averse than foundations, who really can be on the cutting edge of doing things faster, better, at lower cost. And you have to be part of that because you know, and the burden of knowledge is responsibility. Now, just to try to put this in some larger context, I think that the major challenges of the modern world can be put, roughly speaking, into three categories. First of all, with the triumph of market economics, either in a genuinely competitive sense or in many places sponsored and shaped by nation states, a lot of people have been moved out of poverty. Since 1978, in China alone, more people have moved out of poverty into the global middle class than have ever moved that far, that fast in a single entity. But there is still an enormous amount of inequality in the modern world, and it is a severe constraint on growth and a severe contributor to premature deaths, political troubles, and all manner of instability. Half the world's people still live on just a little over $2 a day or less. 1 billion people go to bed hungry every night. 1 billion people don't ever get access to clean water. 2.5 billion people have no access to sanitation. That's really what happened with the cholera outbreak in Haiti. In the United States, median income today, the income in the middle, after adjustments for inflation, median family income today is still lower than it was the day I left office in January of 2001. And it was before the financial crash in September of 2008. We have suffered from an inability to create sufficient jobs at sufficient skill levels, sufficiently well distributed across the world to keep lifting people everywhere out of poverty. And it's a terrible problem because it not only is a constraint on growth and consumption, it also undermines the security people need to do the right thing going forward within their country and beyond their borders. I think that's one reason Gap announced that it was going to pay the proposed minimum wage of $10.10 an hour. They realized if they wanted people to come buy their jeans, they had to have the money to do it. But I predict to you that this inequality question will be with us for the next several years. And I think it's important to say, and I can say this because I live in New York and I haven't had any capital gains in a long time because Hillary was Secretary of State and I didn't want anybody raising any cane about our investments, so I just left the money in the bank where interest rates were negative. But another example of my stunning financial management. But anyway, the point is, I don't mind paying taxes. I think it's the price that you pay for living in a great country and for enjoying success. And so I don't have a problem with that. But you cannot get rid of inequality simply by taxation policy. You can help people at the very bottom. You can help people at the very bottom to have a decent existence, at least to get by. But in order to reduce inequality, you have to create more jobs, tighten the labor markets, and change the job mix. It requires a strategy that will replicate in the next 10 years what happened in the 1990s. And we have to do that. But we also have to be trying to do it for other people in other places to show that we get what they're up against. One of my favorite projects that our foundation does involves working with small farmers in Africa and farmers and fishermen in Latin America. We had a project that last year, now we've doubled it, and we're going to increase it fivefold, in Malawi, where we work with 21,000 small farmers. And parenthetically, this is a huge issue because a lot of people think that since Africa has the largest amount of arable land in the world, since there are 7 billion people on planet Earth, and since a lot of countries like China and Saudi Arabia, for example, have plenty of money and can't feed themselves, the answer is to throw all these small farmers off the land, go in and mechanize it, and make everybody happy. The evidence is if we do that, we'll have more political instability and we'll play the land out sooner and it won't solve the problem. So those of us who worry about that have an obligation to prove that these small farmers can steadily enter a process of modernization where they'll be able to increase their productivity, increase their incomes, and slowly diversify the economy, and then have what happened here 100 years ago happen there, where each year you will be able to produce more food with fewer people, but all those people will have something else to do to make a living. So anyway, we had this project in Malawi where we had an anchor farm of about 200 or 300 acres. And we used it to teach people the best techniques. And with our 21,000 partners, to buy seed for them and fertilizer at higher quality and lower cost, to increase their yields, and then to take their food to market and store it till it gets a good price. This is very important. A lot of you may be surprised to know that some of the poorest farmers in Africa, since the roads are bad and they don't have any rolling transportation, actually pay somebody else 50% of their income just to take the crops to market. So people like the Gates Foundation now, we can actually double farm income just by taking people's food and putting it in the marketplace. But in the first year, we did more than that with these farmers. Most of them were women. Most of them were farming 1 acre of land. Some of them were farming an acre of land with only a handheld hoe. And the average income increase in the first year was 567%, enabling all these people. So they more than doubled production, the inputs were less, and they didn't have to pay 50% of their income to take it to market. The point is, there are opportunities like this all over the world that I think will help us to address the inequality issues. And as I said at the outset, a big part of that is making sure everybody has access to a cell phone and increasingly to modern and affordable biomedical devices that will enable us to bring health care to remote rural places. I'll give you another example that would reduce inequality and help with climate change. The Caribbean, our neighbors, have, believe it or not, the highest electric rates in the world. All these places where the sun shines 300 days a year, and many places where the wind blows, and places where they have lots of biomass, which could be used to generate power, or geothermal, they're paying the highest rates in the world. Why? Because they don't have any traditional energy except for Trinidad, and they import heavy diesel and fuel oil, which is bad for the environment and is killing them economically. We are looking for technological ways to get over the initial investment problems with solar and wind and biomass to accelerate the Caribbean becoming the first totally clean energy place anywhere in the world in terms of generation of electricity. And I think we can do that, but only because of technology. We just worked with Partners in Health, headed by Dr. Paul Farmer, to open this huge teaching hospital in Haiti. That hospital has 1,800 solar panels. It's the biggest solar building in the Caribbean, and it produces a net surplus of power, which we feed into the grid. These are the kinds of things that I think we have to do if we're going to reduce inequality. Second problem we have is that the world is not sustainable in terms of the way we produce and consume energy and local resources because of climate change and because of local degradation. In China, the Yellow River is dry at some points of the year now. And because the Chinese are just like you and I are, whenever you're in trouble, your default position is to fall back on what you're good at. Isn't that true? Don't you do that in your own life? Well, I do. Maybe you're above all that. But so what do they're really good at engineering big projects. So they have engineered these 2 big gravity-driven canals to take water from the Yangtze to the Yellow, and a lot of Chinese engineers, not just environmentalist engineers, think they may wind up drying up both rivers, which would be calamitous for Asia and by extension for the rest of us. And I could give you 10 or 12 examples like that. 90% of the world's fishing stocks are now, fishing centers are understocked now. The air quality in Beijing is as it is, not just because of ambient air pollution, the local pollution, but because the prevailing winds there blow from north to south. And in the north of China, north of Beijing, they used to have a vibrant farming economy, growing most of their wheat, and they overfarmed it, destroyed the topsoil, and now it comes down as dust into the ambient air quality of Beijing, which acts like a soccer net, catching billions of soccer balls every day. So it's not just the global warming problem, it's a resource problem that's more localized. We are going to have to create a world, and we can only do it through technology, where we constantly do more with less. Otherwise, we'll never be able to address our inequality problem. It is a phenomenal opportunity that will require public sector investment, private sector innovation, and foundations and other non-governmental activities to try to figure out how to make this happen faster. The final thing I want to say is that the world is too unstable. You all are here because of instability. That is, that's what a market is. The prospect of success has to carry with it the possibility of failure. But we know from the financial crisis that if there's too much instability, it's like having stasis. The whole thing shuts down. People get scared. And the primary drivers of that today are political violence and financial upheaval. Look how fast the financial crisis spread from the U.S. to the U.K. to Ireland to Iceland to pretty soon there were 35 million Chinese factory workers without jobs. Look how much people worry about political violence, protecting their record, and look at the price attached to trying to protect against it. The controversies raised by the revelations of Mr. Snowden, the arguments over the drone attacks. All of these grow out of the fact that we live in a world where there is too much instability. So when I get up in the morning and I read the newspapers or I watch television news, which often looks like the political equivalent of chaos theory in physics, the way I connect the dots is to ask myself some simple questions. Is this, that, or the other thing the manifestation of too much inequality, too much instability, the unsustainability of modern life? What can we do to reduce that and construct broadly shared opportunities and broadly assume responsibilities? If I can figure out something to do about that, I'm happy. If I can't, I'd live to be worried another day. All of you need to think about that. And I leave you with this last thought. One of the reasons that I'm optimistic about the future, with all the problems we've got, is that on balance, the technological revolution has fostered more cooperation than conflict. It is, after all, just a tool in most contexts, so it could be used positively or negatively, and to be sure has been used in both ways. Nobody's better at disposable cell phone usage than terrorist groups. But if you look around the world today, wherever the dominant form of social organization is a network of creative cooperation, good things are happening. Wherever the dominant form of social organization is identity-based conflicts, good things are not happening. If you look at all the cities in the United States, which are already in better shape than they were before the financial crash, there's some fascinating cooperation going on. You know, San Diego became the center of human genome research. Orlando, the center of computer simulation development. Lots of other examples I could give you. Look what's going to happen in these 45 urban areas where Google's going to build all this broadband capacity. It's a crazy way to do it, really. I mean, it's embarrassing to me that South Korea's download speeds average 4 times ours, but in the world where we live in, where this seems unlikely to come out of Washington, I'll take it where we can get it. But the most important thing is that we keep doing that. This advance of gay rights in America is a reflection that young people basically think of their identities as inclusive, not exclusive. And that's very, very hopeful to me. Because in the end, this is all about an identity crisis or action. Look what's going on in Ukraine today. I've been to Ukraine a lot. Our foundation has done the AIDS work there. I worked very hard to bring Ukraine into a position where it would neither be an instrument of Russian foreign policy nor an instrument of American and European foreign policy, but would be a genuine bridge between Europe and Russia, a place that got along with, related to, and was integrated with both. 20 years ago, I signed an agreement with the President of Ukraine and the then President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, involving Ukraine's giving up all of its nuclear weapons from the old Cold War area, putting them back into Russia for safekeeping, and Russia recognizing the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Seems like a lifetime ago now. But this is the last point I want to make. If you believe that the most important thing we can have to solve the problems of the world and seize the opportunities of the world, to build inclusive communities, our identities have to be informed by what we share in common with other people, not what drives us apart. And I don't mean we should all agree on everything. I mean we should disagree in good faith with the goal of finding the common good and pursuing it. And that's basically what this whole brouhaha in Ukraine is about today. Those people were really brave, and they included a lot of Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine who were sick of a government that would kill people in the street and that was clearly corrupt and ineffective and couldn't provide a good economic outcome for its people, and basically cratered to the pressure from Russia to walk away from Europe and get $15 billion in the short run and continued access to natural gas. So I think it's really important now that we say we're for an inclusive politics. We don't agree with Russia. We're not trying to take Ukraine away from them. We want those people to be free to stand at a crossroads of the earth and a crossroads of history, to be a bridge that brings us together. We believe in a shared future. And this is a big deal because the loss of the Warsaw Pact countries, the loss of the communist system, the end of the Cold War, the painful economic weakness that Russia went through in the aftermath of the Cold War, left a residual longing among many of its people and embodied by its president, basically to recreate a 19th century system of empire and economics and politics, in which all great power games are zero-sum. If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. But the world we're living in has got to be a positive-sum world. Otherwise, we're toast because of our interdependence. We have to find ways for everybody to win. What you see in this conflict is not the only Russia there is. Every year, the great universities of the world engage in an international contest on who can best solve complex computing problems. Quite frequently, 2 Russian universities finish in the top 5. Why shouldn't that be the way they define their greatness? Why shouldn't the welcome they provided to a Korean skater and an American skier be, on their Olympic team, be the way they do well in the modern world? And while we're at it, you should ask yourselves, how do you feel about all this? How will you define your identity? whether you're an American or you come from another country in which Microsoft is involved. How do we appreciate our differences and embrace our common humanity? I'll leave you with this. The most important political book I've read in the last 2 years was not a political book. It was a book called The Social Conquest of Earth by the great Nobel Prize-winning microbiologist E.O. Wilson, who is now 90 or 91 years old, but still very powerful in mind, body, and spirit. Wilson said, he's the first person who told me through his books, that the combined weight of all the ants on Earth is greater than the combined weight of all the people on Earth. That's an interesting little factoid for you to take away. This book is, in about 250 pages, a sketch of what science can tell us about the history of all life, not just human life, on planet Earth. Having done the landscape, Wilson then says, if you look at it, the conclusion is irreversible that the conquest of Earth has come only to the cooperators. The great cooperating species are ants, termites, bees, and people. And he talks about how ants, who are typically chased by predators, have evolved to the point where when they sense when they're about to be caught, and some of them will go up on the tallest blade of grass and sacrifice themselves. How termites in hot climates build living quarters underground with 4 or 5 holes in the top, but they'll only go in and out of one of them. The rest are purely for air conditioning. How bees do their magical allocation of labor so that they can wind up pollinating about half of everything that is consumed by people directly or indirectly. And he said, people are the greatest cooperators because we are the only species, as far as we can determine, that have both consciousness and conscience. But because we are aware of that, we are also prone to arrogance and to think our differences are more important than our common humanity. Therefore, we always seem to be in a race between fulfilling our ultimate promise and engineering our own demise. On balance, Wilson knew this is very important because he spent his lifetime warning about our gluttony destroying tens of thousands of species on Earth. He said on balance he was optimistic because we had not only consciousness but conscience. I'll leave you with that. Technology is liberating people, empowering them, but how they use it and how you use it depends in no small measure on identity and whether what we have in common is more important than our interesting differences. Thank you very much.